The dust-laden wind whipped across Eliza Blackstone's face as she stood frozen at the edge of Lordsburg, New Mexico Territory. 1875. Blood trickled from her split lip, her threadbare dress fluttering against bruised skin as she clutched a small bundle containing everything she owned. Behind her lay the only life she'd known. Ahead stretched nothing but uncertainty and the vast, unforgiving desert. She had fled in the night with no destination in mind, only the desperate need to escape the man who had sworn to love her, but instead had broken her body and spirit over 5 long years of marriage. The merciless sun beat down as Eliza stumbled toward the modest collection of buildings that made up Lordsburg. Her legs threatened to give way with each step, weakened from both exhaustion and the previous night's beating. The town had sprung up alongside the Southern Pacific Railroad line, drawing prospectors, cowboys, and those seeking a fresh start in the expanding West. Now, Eliza hoped to become one of them, though she carried little besides her shame and fear. The main street bustled with afternoon activity, despite the scorching heat. Men on horseback trotted past wagons loaded with supplies, while shopkeepers swept dust from wooden boardwalks. No one paid much attention to Eliza as she made her way toward what appeared to be a general store. She needed water desperately, but had no money to purchase any. "You look like you could use some help, madam." A deep voice spoke from behind her. Eliza flinched violently, nearly losing her balance as she whirled around, raising an arm defensively. The man before her took a step back, his hands lifted in a placating gesture. He wore dusty riding clothes, a weathered Stetson shading piercing blue eyes that regarded her with concern rather than threat. "I mean no harm," he said softly. "Name's Luke Quinn. I noticed you looked a bit lost." Eliza lowered her arm slowly, though her body remained tense, poised for flight. "I'm just passing through," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and disuse. Luke's gaze lingered on her split lip and the bruise darkening her cheek, but he made no comment about her injuries. Instead, he nodded toward the nearby saloon. "They've got water inside. Would you allow me to buy you a drink? Nothing stronger than water if that's your preference." The offer tempted her parched throat, but Eliza shook her head. She'd learned the hard way that a man's kindness always came with a price. "I can't pay you back. I'm not asking for payment, madam, just trying to be neighborly." His voice carried no hidden meanings, just simple honesty that made her hesitate. Her thirst finally won out over caution. "Just water," she agreed reluctantly. Luke led her not to the saloon as she expected, but to a small cafe adjacent to the hotel. He pulled out a chair for her at a corner table that offered a clear view of the door, something Eliza immediately noted and appreciated. When he ordered 2 waters and a plate of biscuits, she stared down at her dirty hands, uncomfortably aware of her disheveled appearance among the relatively respectable establishment. "You're new to Lordsburg," Luke stated after the server had departed. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Eliza replied, not offering more. "Town's growing fast. Railroad brings new folks through almost daily. You planning to stay or moving on?" She hadn't thought beyond escape. "I don't know yet." Their water arrived, and Eliza had to force herself not to gulp it down like a desperate animal. She sipped slowly, feeling Luke's gaze but unable to meet it. "If you're looking for work, Mrs. Davis at the boarding house needs help with cleaning and cooking," he offered casually. "Pays fair, includes a room. She's a decent woman." Eliza finally looked up at him, searching for the trap in his words. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Luke shrugged, breaking a biscuit in half. "Been on my own since I was 16. Know what it's like to arrive somewhere with nothing." He pushed the plate toward her. "Eat something. Food helps thinking." Against her better judgment, Eliza took a biscuit, her stomach growling loudly enough that she flushed with embarrassment. Luke pretended not to notice, focusing instead on buttering his own portion. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment of silence. She hesitated before answering truthfully. "Eliza." She paused, then made a decision. "Eliza Blackstone." Using her maiden name felt both foreign and liberating. "Well, Miss Blackstone, Mrs." she corrected automatically, then wished she hadn't. Luke nodded without comment. "Mrs. Blackstone. If you'd like, I can walk you to the boarding house after you've eaten. No obligation beyond that." Eliza studied him more carefully. Luke Quinn appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His hands were calloused, his posture straight but relaxed. Nothing about him triggered her well-honed sense of danger, yet she remained wary. "What do you do in Lordsburg, Mr. Quinn?" "I run cattle on a small spread about 5 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine." Pride touched his voice briefly. "I come in once a week for supplies." The simple explanation rang true, and Eliza found herself marginally relaxing. "I would appreciate the introduction to Mrs. Davis," she said finally. True to his word, Luke escorted her to a 2-story wooden structure on a quieter side street after their meal. The whitewashed boarding house had a small, well-tended garden in front, with a porch sporting several rocking chairs. He knocked firmly on the door, which was opened moments later by a plump, gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Luke Quinn, twice in one day. What brings you back?" Her gaze shifted to Eliza, quickly assessing her condition. "Mrs. Davis, this is Mrs. Blackstone. She's new to town and looking for work. I mentioned you might need help." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Could always use an extra pair of hands. Can you cook, girl?" "Yes, madam, and clean. I'm a hard worker." Eliza straightened her shoulders despite her fatigue. "Mrs. Davis nodded. "Come inside then, we'll talk terms." She glanced at Luke. "Thank you for bringing her by." Luke tipped his hat to both women. "Madam, Mrs. Blackstone." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be back in town next Saturday if you need anything before then." After he departed, Mrs. Davis led Eliza through a tidy parlor and into a small office at the back of the house. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a wooden chair. Once Eliza complied, the older woman leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "Now, girl, I don't know your story and I don't need to. But I recognize running when I see it." Eliza stiffened, panic flaring in her chest. "Don't worry," Mrs. Davis continued. "I'm not sending you back wherever you came from. This territory's full of people starting over." She paused, studying Eliza's face. "I offer room and board plus $2 a week for help with cooking, cleaning, and serving meals to my boarders. It's honest work, long hours, but you'll be safe here." The kindness, coming so unexpectedly, nearly undid Eliza's fragile composure. "Thank you," she whispered. "Mrs. Davis nodded briskly. "Let's get you settled then. You can start tomorrow after you've had some rest." The room was small but clean, tucked under the eaves on the second floor. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a 3-legged stool. To Eliza, who had spent the previous night huddled behind a stable, it seemed like luxury. Mrs. Davis brought her a simple supper on a tray, along with a worn nightgown and a bar of soap. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. "No one will bother you tonight," the older woman promised before leaving Eliza alone. For the first time in years, Eliza locked a door behind her without fear of punishment. She washed as best she could with the limited water, changed into the borrowed nightgown, and sank onto the bed. Sleep claimed her instantly, but her dreams were haunted by pursuing footsteps and her husband's drunken rage. The next morning brought the reality of her new situation into sharp focus. Mrs. Davis ran a tight ship, expecting promptness and thoroughness in all tasks. Eliza threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the 5 current boarders, 2 railroad clerks, a schoolteacher, an elderly widow, and a land surveyor. The routine of kneading bread, scrubbing floors, and changing linens filled her days, while the exhaustion that followed granted her dreamless sleep. Days stretched into a week, and Eliza began to breathe more freely. Mrs. Davis proved fair if stern, and the boarders treated her with polite indifference. She kept to herself, speaking only when necessary, and avoided venturing into town alone. Each night, she counted the coins Mrs. Davis paid her, storing them in a small pouch beneath her mattress. Freedom, Eliza had discovered, required money. Saturday arrived, and with it, Luke Quinn. Eliza was in the kitchen kneading dough for the next day's bread when Mrs. Davis called for her. "Visitor for you in the parlor," the older woman announced, eyebrow raised in curiosity. Eliza wiped flour from her hands, her heart racing with sudden fear. Had Richard found her? Had someone from her hometown recognized her? She followed Mrs. Davis with leaden feet, then nearly collapsed with relief when she saw Luke standing awkwardly by the fireplace. "Mr. Quinn," she acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Blackstone." He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields. "I trust you're settling in well." "Yes, thank you." Mrs. Davis cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk." "There's coffee in the pot if you'd like some, Luke." She departed with a meaningful glance that made Eliza uncomfortable. "I don't want to interrupt your work," Luke said once they were alone. "Just wanted to check that everything worked out." Eliza nodded, keeping a careful distance between them. "Mrs. Davis has been very kind. I appreciate your recommendation." An awkward silence fell. Luke shifted his weight, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Brought you something. Nothing fancy, just thought it might be useful." She stared at the offered package without reaching for it. "I can't accept gifts, Mr. Quinn." "It's just soap," he explained quickly. "My sister makes it with lavender from her garden. Thought you might like something nice is all." When she still hesitated, he added, "No strings attached, Mrs. Blackstone. You can consider it payment for making me the best apple pie in the territory next time I stop by." His attempt at humor was accompanied by a gentle smile. Slowly, Eliza accepted the package, unwrapping it to reveal a pale purple bar that indeed smelled of lavender. The simple gift touched her unexpectedly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll make sure to bake that pie." Luke's expression brightened. "I look forward to it. Well, I should let you get back to work. We'll see you next Saturday, I expect." After he left, Eliza returned to the kitchen, the soap clutched in her hand. Mrs. Davis was waiting, her expression knowing. "Luke Quinn's a good man," she remarked casually. "Owns that small ranch free and clear. Built it himself after working cattle for the Wallace outfit for years." "I'm married, Mrs. Davis," Eliza stated flatly. The older woman's gaze sharpened. "Are you now? No wedding ring, and you flinch whenever a man raises his voice. That husband of yours wouldn't happen to be responsible for those bruises that are finally fading, would he?" Eliza's silence was answer enough. "Thought so." Mrs. Davis sighed. "Look, girl, I'm not saying you should take up with Luke Quinn or anyone else. Just saying that not all men are cut from the same cloth as the one you ran from." "It doesn't matter," Eliza replied, returning to her bread dough with unnecessary force. "I made vows." "Vows go both ways," Mrs. Davis muttered, but didn't press further. The following weeks established a pattern. Luke appeared every Saturday, never staying long but always bringing some small token, a book of poetry, a ribbon for her hair, fresh eggs from his henhouse. He asked for nothing in return except conversation, and gradually, Eliza found herself looking forward to his visits. She learned that he had come west from Pennsylvania after the Civil War, worked as a cowhand until saving enough to purchase his land, and lived alone except for occasional help during calving season. In turn, she shared carefully edited pieces of her own history, her childhood in Missouri, her skill with baking that she'd learned from her mother, her fondness for wildflowers. She never mentioned Richard or their marriage, and Luke never asked directly, though she sometimes caught him looking at the gold band she still wore. As summer heat gave way to autumn crispness, Eliza's nightmares decreased and her body healed completely. The fearful woman who had stumbled into Lordsburg began to fade, replaced by someone who occasionally smiled at a boarder's joke or hummed softly while working. Mrs. Davis commented on the change one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "You're coming back to life," the older woman observed. "It suits you." Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared in the fading light, heading directly toward the boarding house. As they drew closer, Eliza's blood turned to ice. The lead rider, his familiar silhouette unmistakable even in the dimness, was Richard. "No," she whispered, the bowl of peas tumbling from her lap as she stood. "No, no, no." Mrs. Davis rose beside her. "Is that him?" she asked sharply. Eliza nodded, unable to speak further as panic closed her throat. She should run, hide, but her legs refused to move, rooted by terror as her husband dismounted and strode toward the porch. 5 years of marriage had taught her the deadly calm that preceded his worst violence, the set of his shoulders, the controlled movements that would explode into fury once they were alone. "There you are, my dear wife," Richard called, his voice carrying the false warmth she knew too well. "You've led me on quite a chase." Mrs. Davis stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Eliza. "Can I help you, sir?" Richard smiled, all charm and respectability in public. "No need, madam. I've come to collect my wayward wife. Eliza, gather your things. We're leaving." "She's not going anywhere," Mrs. Davis stated flatly. "Especially not with a man who uses his fists on a woman." His expression darkened momentarily before the smile returned, tighter now. "I fear you've been misled. My wife suffers from nervous episodes that cause her to fabricate stories. Her condition requires my constant care, which is why I've been searching for her these past months." He turned to Eliza, extending his hand. "Come, dear, the doctor in Santa Fe is expecting us." Mrs. Davis remained unmoved. "I haven't heard any stories from her, haven't needed to. The bruises told me plenty when she arrived." One of Richard's companions shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow, Richard. Let your wife get her things together proper-like." "She has nothing that I didn't provide," Richard snapped, his facade cracking. He turned back to Eliza. "This ridiculous game ends now. Get down here." The command, so familiar in its menacing tone, nearly broke her resistance. Eliza took a half-step forward before Mrs. Davis's hand on her arm stopped her. "I'll fetch the sheriff," the older woman said quietly. Richard laughed, a harsh sound. "By all means. I have our marriage certificate and statements from her doctor confirming her mental instability. The law will return my property to me." His gaze fixed on Eliza, cold with promise. "And then we'll discuss your disobedience in private." Mrs. Davis's grip tightened on Eliza's arm. "Stay here," she ordered, then turned to enter the house, presumably to send for help. Seeing his opportunity, Richard bounded up the porch steps. His companions remained mounted, watching with expressions ranging from discomfort to disinterest. Before Eliza could retreat, Richard seized her wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm. You embarrass me like this, he hissed, his face inches from hers. Running away like a thief in the night after everything I've given you. You nearly killed me, Eliza whispered, finding her voice at last. I couldn't stay. That was your fault, he snarled, dragging her toward the steps. You made me angry, always making me angry with your disobedience. Now you'll come home and learn your place properly. Eliza struggled against his grip, her hard-won sense of self refusing to surrender to his control again. No, I won't go with you. Richard's face contorted with rage. He raised his free hand, and Eliza braced for the blow that had become so familiar over the years of their marriage. But before it could fall, a new voice cut through the tension. I suggest you release the lady immediately. Luke Quinn sat astride his horse at the edge of the property, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. Richard's companions straightened in their saddles, suddenly alert to potential trouble. This doesn't concern you, stranger, Richard called, though his grip on Eliza's wrist loosened slightly. This is between a man and his wife. Luke dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to the fence post before approaching. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to dangerous situations, his right hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. When a man raises his hand to a woman on my friend's property, it becomes my concern. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps, looking up at Richard. I won't ask again. Let her go. Richard's companions exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. One of them cleared his throat. Richard, maybe we should shut up, Andrews, Richard snapped. To Luke, he said, this woman is my lawful wife and I'm taking her home. Interfere and you'll answer to the law. Luke's gaze shifted to Eliza, taking in her frightened expression and the way she pulled against Richard's hold. Mrs. Blackstone, do you want to go with this man? Blackstone, Richard spat. Her name is Eliza Norton and she has no choice in the matter. I wasn't asking you, Luke replied evenly, his attention remaining on Eliza. Madam, the moment stretched between them. In Luke's steady gaze, Eliza found something she had never expected: choice. He wasn't commanding or deciding for her, but offering support for whatever she decided. The realization gave her courage. No, she said clearly, pulling her wrist free with a sudden jerk. I do not want to go with him. I never want to see him again. Richard lunged for her, but Luke was already moving. He bounded up the steps and inserted himself between them, facing Richard with a dangerous calm. The lady has spoken, he said quietly. I suggest you leave now while you still can. Richard's face flushed dark with rage. You have no right. She's mine by law and by God. No person belongs to another, Luke replied, his voice hardening. Not in this territory, not anywhere I respect. For a moment it seemed Richard might attack despite the odds turning against him. His hands clenched into fists, and he took a half-step forward before one of his companions called out. Richard, riders coming. Looks like the sheriff. Indeed, the thunder of approaching hooves signaled new arrivals. Mrs. Davis must have sent someone for help while they were confronting each other. Richard glared at Luke, then at Eliza. This isn't over, he promised. I'll be back with papers from a judge. You'll regret this humiliation, Eliza. He stormed down the steps and mounted his horse as Sheriff Taylor and 2 deputies arrived. A brief, tense conversation followed, with Richard presenting his marriage certificate, while Mrs. Davis and Luke explained the situation. The sheriff, a pragmatic man who had seen his share of domestic disputes, suggested a cooling-off period. Mr. Norton, I understand your legal claim, but I can't force a woman to go with a man she claims abused her without investigating further, he explained. I suggest you take a room at the hotel. We'll sort this out properly tomorrow with the justice of the peace. Richard looked ready to object, but with 3 armed lawmen and Luke present, He clearly recognized the futility of further confrontation. With a last venomous glance at Eliza, he wheeled his horse around and rode toward town, his companions following. Once they were gone, Eliza's legs finally gave way. She sank onto the porch step, shaking uncontrollably as the terror she had suppressed during the confrontation overwhelmed her. Luke knelt beside her, careful not to touch her. "He's gone for now. You're safe." Eliza looked up at him through tears she couldn't control. "He'll never stop. Never. He'll drag me back," and she couldn't finish the thought. Mrs. Davis joined them, wrapping a shawl around Eliza's shoulders. "We need to get her inside. Sheriff, what happens now?" Sheriff Taylor removed his hat, looking uncomfortable. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Davis. If he has proper documentation proving their marriage and without clear evidence of abuse beyond Mrs. Norton's word against his, the law generally sides with the husband in these matters." "But you saw him," Mrs. Davis protested. "He was about to strike her right in front of us." "I saw a man reaching for his wife, which isn't illegal, regrettable as that may be," the sheriff replied. "I'm not saying it's right, just stating the reality of the situation." Luke stood, his expression resolute. "There must be something we can do." Sheriff Taylor hesitated. "Well, the justice of the peace won't be back from Santa Fe until next week. That buys some time." He looked at Eliza with genuine sympathy. "Madam, do you have any documentation of previous abuse? Witnesses? Anything that might counter your husband's claim about your mental state?" Eliza shook her head numbly. Richard had been too careful, ensuring his violence left no permanent marks and occurred only in private. The few times someone had noticed her injuries, his position as a respected businessman and church deacon had made her claims seem hysterical and attention-seeking by comparison. "Then I suggest you use this time to consider your options," the sheriff advised. "I'll keep an eye on your husband, but legally, my hands are tied unless he commits an actual crime." After the sheriff and his deputies departed, Mrs. Davis helped Eliza inside while Luke remained on the porch, his expression troubled. Eliza expected him to leave, having already involved himself more than any reasonable person would in someone else's problems. Instead, when Mrs. Davis returned to the kitchen to prepare a calming tea, Luke asked permission to speak with Eliza alone. They sat in the parlor, the lamp casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper. Eliza clasped her trembling hands in her lap, shame washing over her as she imagined what Luke must think of her situation. "I'm sorry you were drawn into this," she said softly. Luke leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Don't apologize. That man, your husband, he's the one who should be apologizing for everything he's done to you." Eliza shook her head. "You don't understand. Richard says I provoke him, that I deserve correction when I fail as a wife." The words came automatically, Richard's accusations so deeply ingrained that she spoke them as truth, despite knowing better. "They said I deserve the abuse," she whispered, more to herself than to Luke, repeating what she'd been told by Richard, by his family, by their pastor who advised her to be more submissive. Luke's expression darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "You deserve only kindness," he said firmly. "No one deserves to be hurt by someone who claims to love them. No one." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, broke something inside Eliza. Tears flowed freely as years of accumulated pain and shame poured out. Luke offered a handkerchief but didn't attempt to comfort her physically, seeming to understand that touch might not be welcome. When her tears finally subsided, Luke spoke again. "I have a proposition, Mrs. Blackstone or Norton, if that's your legal name." "Norton," she confirmed, wiping her eyes. "Though I've come to prefer Blackstone," he nodded. The sheriff's right that legally your options are limited, but there might be a way to change that. He took a deep breath. I'm suggesting marriage. Eliza stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? A marriage of convenience, Luke clarified quickly. If you were to divorce Norton and immediately marry someone else, it would complicate his ability to force you to return. As your new husband, I would have the legal standing to refuse him access to you. You can't be serious, Eliza breathed, shocked by the proposal. I am entirely serious. Luke met her gaze steadily. I have a house with plenty of room. You would have your own space, your own bedroom. I give you my word that I would never touch you without permission or expect any wifely duties beyond what you choose to offer freely. Eliza shook her head, overwhelmed. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Luke's expression softened. I know enough. I know you're brave and hardworking. I know you deserve a chance at happiness that doesn't come with bruises and fear. He paused. And I know what it's like to feel trapped. My father was like your husband, quick with his fists when things didn't go his way. I couldn't protect my mother then. Maybe I can help you now. The revelation of his own painful history made his offer even more remarkable to Eliza. Still, the idea seemed too radical, too risky. What about when you want a real wife, children? If that time comes, we can discuss divorce or annulment, Luke said practically. But for now, this would give you protection under the law that you currently lack as a single woman. Before she could respond, Mrs. Davis returned with the tea tray, having clearly overheard at least part of their conversation. It's not a bad idea, she said, setting down the tray with more force than necessary. Better than watching you dragged back to that monster. Mrs. Davis, Eliza exclaimed, shocked by her landlady's bluntness. The older woman poured tea with steady hands. Girl, I've seen too many women in your situation. The law won't help you. The church won't help you. Sometimes the only protection is another man's name. She handed Eliza a cup. Luke Quinn is offering you shelter without strings. At the very least, consider it. Eliza looked between them, the teacup warm in her hands. I need time to think. Luke stood, reaching for his hat. Of course, I'll return tomorrow for your answer if that's acceptable. He hesitated at the door. Whatever you decide, I'll do what I can to help you. After he left, Mrs. Davis sat heavily in the chair he had vacated. That man just offered you a way out, a decent man offering marriage with no expectations. She shook her head. In my day, we'd have called that a miracle. It's too much to accept, Eliza protested. Too great a sacrifice on his part. Is it, Mrs. Davis raised an eyebrow. He's a man of 33 living alone on a ranch that could support a family. Maybe he has his own reasons for proposing an arrangement that gives him a wife in name without the complications of courtship. The observation gave Eliza pause. Perhaps Luke's offer wasn't entirely selfless. A marriage of convenience might benefit him in ways she hadn't considered. The thought made the proposal slightly less overwhelming. I still need to think, she insisted. Mrs. Davis nodded, rising with a grunt. Think quickly. Your husband didn't strike me as the patient type. Sleep eluded Eliza that night as she weighed her limited options. By dawn, she had reached a decision born of desperation and pragmatism rather than romantic notions. When Luke returned mid-morning, she met him on the porch, her few possessions already packed. If your offer still stands, she said without preamble, I accept with conditions. Luke nodded, his expression serious. Name them. 1 year, Eliza stated. We remain married for 1 year, during which time I will keep house and cook in exchange for protection. After that, if either of us wishes to end the arrangement, we proceed with divorce amicably. Agreed, Luke said immediately. I keep any wages I earn separately, she continued. And I maintain my own bedroom as you suggested. Of course. Eliza took a deep breath for her final condition. "And if at any point if you ever raise a hand to me, the agreement ends immediately." Luke's expression darkened with sadness rather than offense. "Mrs. Blackstone, Eliza, I would cut off my own hand before using it to strike you or any woman. But yes, I agree to your condition absolutely." With terms established, events moved quickly. Luke arranged for the justice of the peace in the neighboring town of Silver City to handle both the divorce and subsequent marriage in a single day, using his considerable local reputation to expedite matters. Mrs. Davis accompanied them as witness, bringing along her boarder Mr. Holloway, the land surveyor, as additional support. The divorce proceeding was brief but tense, with the justice requiring only minimal evidence given Richard's absence. The marriage ceremony that followed was equally perfunctory, a simple exchange of vows with no romance or celebration. Eliza wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton that Mrs. Davis had helped alter to fit better, while Luke appeared in a clean black suit that transformed him from rancher to respectable businessman. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the justice declared, closing his book with a snap. "Mr. Quinn, you may kiss your bride." Luke hesitated, glancing at Eliza with questioning eyes. Understanding his silent request for permission, she gave a slight nod. His kiss, when it came, was gentle and brief, a mere brushing of lips that sealed their contract without presuming intimacy. "Well, that's done, Mrs. Davis announced as they exited the justice's office. "Now let's get you two home before word reaches Richard Norton." They parted from Mrs. Davis and Mr. Holloway at the Lordsburg town limits, with promises to visit soon. As they continued toward Luke's ranch, Eliza felt equal parts terror and hope warring within her chest. She was legally free from Richard, but now bound to a virtual stranger by equally binding vows. Luke's ranch appeared on the horizon as the afternoon light began to soften a modest but well-maintained property nestled against gently rolling hills. A small house constructed of timber and adobe stood flanked by a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Cottonwood trees provided shade around the house, while a vegetable garden and chicken coop suggested a level of self-sufficiency. "It's not much," Luke said as they approached, uncertainty coloring his voice for the first time since she'd met him. "But it's peaceful here." "It's lovely," Eliza replied honestly, struck by the evident care that had gone into creating this homestead. Luke helped her down from the wagon, then carried her single bag to the house. Inside, Eliza found a surprisingly comfortable home, simple but clean, with solid furniture and touches of refinement she hadn't expected from a bachelor rancher. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes ranging from practical agricultural texts to poetry collections. Handmade quilts draped over chairs, and landscape paintings brightened whitewashed walls. "My sister Sarah visits twice a year," Luke explained, noticing her surprise at the homey touches. "Says she can't bear to see me living like a savage." He showed her through the house, a main room combining parlor and dining area, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, his bedroom, and finally, the room that would be hers. The latter had clearly been a guest room previously, furnished with a bed, dresser, and small writing desk positioned near a window overlooking the garden. "I put fresh linens on the bed this morning," Luke said, setting her bag on the chest at the foot of the bed. "Bathrooms down the hall. We have a pump inside for water. It's not fancy like town houses, but saves trips to the well." "It's more than adequate," Eliza assured him, touched by his obvious efforts to make the space welcoming. Luke shifted awkwardly. "I'll let you settle in. Take all the time you need. When you're ready, I'll be in the barn, still have evening chores to finish." Left alone, Eliza sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. In less than 12 hours, she had divorced one husband and married another, leaving behind the tentative independence she'd established in Lordsburg. The room around her, while comfortable, represented yet another man's domain in which she must find her place. And yet, as she unpacked her meager possessions, Eliza felt the first stirrings of genuine hope. Luke had made no demands, shown no signs of the controlling behavior that had characterized her life with Richard. The wedding band he had placed on her finger, a simple gold band purchased hastily in Silver City, carried none of the weight of ownership that Richard's ring had represented. By the time she ventured outside to find Luke, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple across the western sky. She found him in the corral, brushing down his horse with methodical strokes. "Can I help with anything?" she asked, keeping a respectful distance from the animal. Luke looked up, surprise and pleasure crossing his features. "No need. Almost finished here." He patted the horse's neck affectionately before securing the brush on a nearby post. "Are you hungry?" "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs." "I'd be happy to cook," Eliza offered quickly. "It's part of our arrangement after all." A shadow passed over Luke's expression. "Eliza, you don't need to cook tonight. You've had a long day." "I'd prefer to be useful," she insisted. Idleness made her nervous, too reminiscent of the times Richard had forbidden her to work as punishment. Luke studied her face, then nodded. "All right. Kitchen's stocked reasonably well. Make whatever you'd like." Cooking in the unfamiliar kitchen provided a welcome distraction. Eliza found flour, lard, and dried berries to make biscuits, along with bacon, eggs, and canned vegetables for a simple but hearty meal. By the time Luke came in from his chores, she had the table set and food ready. They ate mostly in silence, the newness of their situation creating an awkwardness neither seemed able to overcome immediately. Luke complimented the food sincerely, and Eliza found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled his utensils, the respectful distance he maintained, the absence of criticism that had been Richard's constant accompaniment to meals. After dinner, Luke insisted on helping with the dishes despite her protests. "My mother taught me that shared work makes for a peaceful home," he explained, rolling up his sleeves to wash while she dried. "Besides, your cooking deserves at least that much appreciation." The simple praise warmed her more than it should have. When the kitchen was clean, Luke showed her where everything was stored, making sure she knew how to operate the stove properly and where to find supplies. "I rise early," he told her as they prepared to retire for the night. "But don't feel obligated to match my schedule. Rest as long as you need." At her bedroom door, he paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Eliza, I want you to know that your door has a lock. Use it if it makes you feel safer. This is your space now." The consideration nearly undid her composure. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. Luke nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "Good night, then. Sleep well." That night, for the first time since fleeing Richard, Eliza slept without fear of what morning might bring. The following days established a cautious routine. Luke rose before dawn, tending to essential chores before returning for breakfast. Eliza, determined to fulfill her part of their bargain, made sure hot food awaited him. During the day, she cleaned and organized the house, discovering small ways to improve their living space while Luke worked with his cattle, repaired fences, or handled the countless tasks required to maintain the ranch. They took evening meals together, their conversation gradually becoming less stilted as they discovered shared interests in books and music. Luke proved to be an educated man despite his frontier lifestyle, often reading aloud in the evenings from his collection of classic literature, or discussing news from the weekly newspaper he collected in town. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Luke mentioned needing supplies from Lordsburg. "Would you like to accompany me?" he asked over breakfast. "Might be good for you to get off the ranch for a while." Eliza hesitated, fear of encountering Richard warring with her desire for independence. "Is it safe? He might still be in town." "Sheriff Taylor sent word that Norton left for Santa Fe after filing a complaint about our marriage," Luke informed her. "Apparently, he's seeking to have it invalidated, claiming you were still legally his wife when we married." Alarm shot through her. "Can he do that?" Luke shook his head. "The divorce was properly recorded before our marriage. He's grasping at straws. But," he added gently, "if you're uncomfortable going to town, I understand completely." His willingness to accommodate her fears without judgment made the decision easier. "No, I'll come. I should visit Mrs. Davis anyway to thank her properly." The trip to town passed pleasantly, with Luke pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the region's history. In Lordsburg, they completed their shopping efficiently before stopping at the boarding house, where Mrs. Davis welcomed them warmly. "Marriage suits you," the older woman declared, studying Eliza's face. "You've got color in your cheeks again." Eliza felt herself blushing. "It's the fresh air at the ranch," she demurred. Mrs. Davis snorted, unconvinced. "And decent treatment, I'd wager." She turned to Luke. "You're taking good care of our girl, then?" "I believe Mrs. Quinn is taking better care of me," he replied with a small smile. "My house hasn't been so clean or my meals so good since my mother was alive." The use of her new name, Mrs. Quinn, struck Eliza forcefully. She had been introducing herself as Mrs. Blackstone for so long that the legal reality of her situation had not fully registered. She was Luke's wife now, if only on paper. Their visit was cut short when Mrs. Davis's newest boarder required attention, but the older woman pressed Eliza to return soon. "Don't become a stranger just because you're a rancher's wife now," she admonished. As they drove home, Eliza found herself contemplating the curious position she occupied in Luke's life. Wife, but not wife. Partner, but not truly. The arrangement, practical as it was, created boundaries that were simultaneously comforting and confusing. "Thank you for taking me to town," she said as the ranch came into view. "It was good to see Mrs. Davis again." Luke glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You're not a prisoner at the ranch, Eliza. You're free to visit friends or go to town whenever you wish. I can teach you to drive the wagon if you'd like." The offer of such freedom, so different from Richard's constant monitoring of her movements, left Eliza momentarily speechless. "I would like that," she finally managed. True to his word, Luke began teaching her to handle the team the very next day. He was a patient instructor, explaining each step clearly and offering encouragement rather than criticism when she made mistakes. By the end of the week, Eliza could confidently harness the horses and drive the wagon around the ranch property. As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch work intensified with preparations for the coming cold months. Luke spent longer days in the fields and with the cattle, often returning after dark, exhausted but satisfied with the progress. Eliza expanded her contributions beyond housekeeping, learning to tend the garden, care for the chickens, and even assist with minor veterinary treatments for the livestock. One evening in late November, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains, bringing driving rain that turned to sleet as temperatures dropped. Luke had not returned from checking the northern pasture where several pregnant cows were grazing, and as darkness fell, Eliza grew increasingly concerned. Unable to simply wait, She donned Luke's spare oilskin coat and lit a lantern, stepping out into the howling wind. She had barely reached the barn when a figure emerged from the gloom. Luke, leading his horse, both drenched and shivering. "What are you doing out here?" He called over the wind, hurrying toward her. "Looking for you," she replied, holding the lantern higher. "You're soaked through." They rushed to the barn, where Luke quickly unsaddled his horse and rubbed the animal down while Eliza held the lantern. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, despite their obvious stiffness from cold. "You shouldn't have worried," he said, his teeth chattering slightly. "Just got caught checking the north fence when the storm worsened." "Of course I worried," Eliza responded, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "You've been gone since dawn." Something shifted in Luke's expression: surprise, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with physical temperature. "I'm not used to someone waiting for me," he admitted quietly. The simple statement revealed more about his solitary life than all their previous conversations combined. Eliza felt a surge of protective concern that she hadn't expected to feel for this capable man who had rescued her. "Well, now there is," she said firmly. "Come inside before you catch your death." In the house, she insisted he change into dry clothes while she heated water for coffee and soup. When Luke emerged from his bedroom in wool trousers and a flannel shirt, his hair still damp but no longer dripping, Eliza had the table set with steaming bowls and hot biscuits left from breakfast. "This is heaven," Luke sighed as he sank into his chair. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, the storm raging outside making their warm kitchen feel like a sanctuary. As Eliza cleared the dishes, Luke moved to the fireplace, adding logs to build up the heat. "The cattle should be fine," he said, answering her unasked question. "Moved them to the sheltered valley yesterday. Good thing, too. This storm might last a couple days according to my aching knee." He rubbed the joint in question, which Eliza had noticed sometimes troubled him in cold weather. "Old injury?" she asked, joining him by the fire. Luke nodded. "Took a bullet during a cattle drive 6 years ago. Some rustlers tried to cut off a portion of the herd." He flexed the knee gingerly. "Healed well enough, but likes to remind me when weather's changing." The casual mention of such danger made Eliza realize how little she truly knew about Luke's life before they met. "You've never really spoken about your past," she observed. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Not much to tell that's worth hearing." "I'd like to hear it anyway," she said softly, "if you're willing to share." Luke studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough, considering our arrangement." He settled more comfortably, his gaze drawn to the dancing flames. Born in Pennsylvania to a blacksmith father and a mother who'd been a schoolteacher before marriage. Had 2 sisters, Sarah, who you know of, and Mary, who died of scarlet fever when she was 8. He spoke without self-pity, but with quiet honesty about his father's alcoholism and violent temper, his mother's quiet endurance, and his own determination to escape west as soon as he was old enough. He'd worked his way across the country, taking jobs on farms and ranches, learning the cattle business from the ground up until he could save enough for his own small herd and, eventually, this land. "What about you?" he asked when he'd finished. "I know bits and pieces, but not how you ended up with a man like Richard Norton." Eliza tensed instinctively at the mention of Richard's name, but the genuine interest in Luke's eyes contained no judgment. Slowly, haltingly, she shared her own story, her childhood as the daughter of a struggling merchant, her father's death when she was 16, leaving her and her mother nearly destitute. Richard, 10 years her senior and already a successful businessman, had seemed a godsend when he began courting her. He was charming, attentive, she recalled, twisting her hands in her lap. My mother was so relieved when he proposed she saw him as our salvation from poverty. The violence didn't start until after we were married, after my mother had passed, and we'd moved here for his business ventures. Luke listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she described how Richard had systematically isolated her from potential friends, controlled every aspect of her life, and punished perceived transgressions with increasing brutality. "The night I ran," she concluded, "he'd caught me reading a letter from a childhood friend, my only connection to my past life. He burned it in front of me then." She trailed off, unable to detail the beating that had followed. "When he finally fell asleep, I knew I had to leave or eventually he would kill me, even if he didn't mean to." Luke's hands had clenched into fists during her recounting, but his voice remained gentle. "You showed incredible courage, Eliza, not just in leaving but in surviving all those years." His understanding, so different from the dismissal or blame she had expected, brought tears to her eyes. "I should have left sooner," she whispered. "Should have been stronger." "No," Luke said firmly, leaning forward to catch her gaze. "You survived in the only way possible until escape became an option. That's not weakness, that's endurance." The validation of her experience, spoken with such certainty, broke something open inside Eliza. Tears flowed freely as years of suppressed grief and shame poured out. This time, unlike in the Lordsburg parlor, she didn't try to hide her emotion or apologize for it. Luke remained present but respectful, offering his handkerchief but not presuming to comfort her physically. When her tears finally subsided, the storm outside had quieted to a gentle patter against the windows, as if nature itself had exhausted its fury alongside her. "I think we could both use something stronger than coffee," Luke suggested, rising to retrieve a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet. He poured a small measure into 2 glasses, offering one to Eliza. "For medicinal purposes," he added with a slight smile. Eliza accepted the glass hesitantly. Richard had never allowed her alcohol, claiming it made women loose and immoral. The whiskey burned pleasantly as she sipped it, warmth spreading through her chest and loosening the tight knot that had formed there during her confession. "To new beginnings," Luke said, raising his glass slightly. "To new beginnings," she echoed, the words feeling like a promise. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Having shared their pasts, a new ease developed between them. Conversations flowed more naturally, silences became comfortable rather than awkward, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, the careful distance they maintained began to shrink. As December arrived, bringing with it the first dusting of snow and thoughts of Christmas, Eliza found herself contemplating gifts for Luke. Their arrangement had never specified holiday celebrations, but she wanted to acknowledge his kindness somehow. After careful consideration, she used some of her saved wages to purchase material in Lordsburg, working secretly during his long absences to sew a new winter shirt and knit a warm scarf. Luke, for his part, seemed equally thoughtful about the approaching holiday. He disappeared into town one Saturday and returned with a small pine tree strapped to the wagon, along with a mysterious wooden crate he stored in the barn out of Eliza's sight. "Thought we might want something festive," he explained when she expressed surprise at the tree. "Sarah always insists on decorations. Seemed a shame not to continue the tradition." Together they set up the tree in the parlor, decorating it with paper stars Eliza crafted and pine cones dipped in melted candle wax. The simple decorations transformed the room, bringing a warmth and joy that Eliza had not experienced during Christmas for many years. Richard had considered such frivolities wasteful, preferring austere religious observance to celebration. On Christmas Eve, After a special dinner of roast chicken and apple pie, Luke disappeared briefly to the barn. He returned carrying a medium-sized package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. "Merry Christmas, Eliza," he said, presenting it with an almost boyish nervousness. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." Eliza accepted the gift with trembling hands. "But I was going to give you my gift tomorrow," she protested. Luke smiled. "Where I grew up, we always opened one gift on Christmas Eve, call it family tradition." Carefully unwrapping the package, Eliza gasped when she revealed a beautiful lap desk of polished cherry wood, complete with compartments for paper, pens, and ink. "I noticed you like to write in the evenings," Luke explained. "Thought you might appreciate something proper instead of balancing everything on books." The thoughtfulness of the gift, so perfectly suited to her habit of writing letters and keeping a journal, touched Eliza deeply. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Impulsively, she retrieved her own gift from its hiding place in her bedroom. "Then you should open one too." Luke unwrapped the shirt and scarf with obvious delight, running his fingers over the careful stitching. "You made these?" he asked, genuine appreciation in his voice. Eliza nodded, suddenly shy. "The blue should bring out your eyes," she said, then blushed at the personal observation. Luke's gaze met hers, holding for a moment longer than usual. "Thank you, Eliza. No one's made something like this for me in a very long time." The evening concluded with Luke reading the Christmas story from his family Bible, a tradition he explained his mother had maintained despite his father's indifference to religion. As his deep voice recited the familiar words, Eliza found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the gentleness of his hands as he turned the pages. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the attraction she felt toward him, not merely gratitude for his rescue, but genuine admiration for the man he had proven himself to be over these months. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. Their arrangement had never contemplated romantic feelings, and Eliza wasn't certain she was ready for such complications given her recent escape from Richard. Yet as Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, bringing with it a peaceful celebration unlike any Eliza had known in her adult life, she found herself wondering if perhaps their convenient marriage might someday become something more. Luke wore his new shirt and scarf, declaring them the finest he'd ever owned, while Eliza used her lap desk to write thank you notes to Mrs. Davis and the others who had helped her. Winter settled fully over the ranch, bringing shorter days and longer nights spent by the fire. Luke taught Eliza to play chess, while she introduced him to card games her father had enjoyed. They read aloud to each other from Luke's book collection, discussing ideas and sharing perspectives with increasing openness. In January, a letter arrived from the lawyer Luke had retained to monitor Richard's legal maneuvers. The news was positive. Richard's attempt to invalidate their marriage had been rejected by the territorial court, which recognized the proper sequence and documentation of Eliza's divorce and remarriage. However, the lawyer warned that Richard had been making inquiries about Luke's background and business dealings, suggesting he might be seeking other avenues of attack. "He won't give up easily," Eliza said after reading the letter, fear shadowing her eyes. "He considers me his property." Luke folded the letter carefully. "He can consider whatever he likes. Legally, you're free of him." He hesitated, then added, "Though perhaps we should be cautious when visiting town for a while longer." Eliza agreed, relieved by Luke's pragmatic approach rather than dismissal of her concerns. She had learned to trust his judgment in the months they had lived together, finding that he neither exaggerated dangers nor minimized real threats. As winter gradually yielded to early spring, bringing new calves to the herd and fresh growth to the garden, Eliza found herself settling into ranch life with increasing contentment. The nightmares that had plagued her early in their marriage had diminished, and she moved through the house and property with growing confidence. Luke had kept every promise made in their arrangement, respecting her privacy while providing security and companionship. Yet something was changing between them, subtle shifts in the atmosphere when their hands accidentally touched while passing dishes, lingering glances across the table, the increasing frequency with which they found reasons to be in the same room. Neither acknowledged these changes openly. As if by silent agreement, they were allowing feelings to develop naturally, without pressure. In late March, as they prepared for the spring cattle drive that would take Luke away from the ranch for nearly 2 weeks, the careful equilibrium they had maintained was unexpectedly shattered. Eliza was in the barn, gathering eggs from the nest boxes some hens had established there, when she heard horses approaching. Assuming it was Luke returning from checking fence lines, she continued her task until unfamiliar voices reached her ears. Peering through a crack in the barn wall, she felt her blood freeze. Richard Norton sat astride a bay horse, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize. They had stopped at the house, and Richard was dismounting, his movements carrying the confident arrogance she remembered all too well. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Eliza forced herself to think clearly. Luke was at least an hour's ride away. She couldn't reach him in time, and the men would surely see her if she attempted to flee across the open land between the barn and the nearest neighbor's property. Her only option was to remain hidden, and hope they left before Luke returned. The last thing she wanted was a confrontation that might turn violent. Retreating deeper into the barn, Eliza concealed herself in the small tack room, leaving the door slightly ajar so she could hear what transpired. The men entered the barn minutes later, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Must be out working," one voice commented. "Place seems empty." "The woman might be around," Richard replied, his familiar tone sending shivers down Eliza's spine. "Check the outbuildings, I'll look in here." Eliza pressed herself against the wall as footsteps approached the tack room. Richard paused just outside, so close she could smell the cologne he always wore, an expensive scent that now made her stomach clench with revulsion. "Doesn't look like much," he observed to someone, presumably examining Luke's modest equipment. "Can't believe she preferred this to what I provided." "Maybe she ain't here by choice," the other man suggested. "Quinn could be keeping her against her will." Richard laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "No, Eliza fancies herself in love with her rescuer. Always was susceptible to romantic nonsense." His voice hardened. "But she'll learn that a wife can't simply decide to leave her husband for another man. There are consequences for such betrayal." The implicit threat in his words made Eliza's hands tremble, but she remained absolutely still as Richard moved away, continuing to inspect the barn. When the men finally departed, she waited a full 10 minutes before emerging from hiding, her legs barely supporting her as she hurried to the house. Inside, evidence of their intrusion was everywhere: drawers pulled open, Luke's desk rifled through, her own bedroom door standing ajar, though she distinctly remembered closing it. Heart pounding, Eliza checked to ensure nothing of value had been taken, then immediately began preparing to leave. She had no idea what Richard planned, but his presence and words convinced her that staying alone at the ranch was dangerous. She had just finished saddling the gentlest of Luke's horses when hoofbeats announced another arrival. Grabbing a pitchfork as a makeshift weapon, Eliza positioned herself behind the barn door, prepared to defend herself if Richard had returned. "Eliza," Luke's voice called, concern evident in his tone. "Are you here?" I saw unfamiliar tracks on the road in. Relief made her legs weak as she dropped the pitchfork and hurried outside. Luke, thank God it's you. The alarm on his face intensified when he saw her expression. What happened? Are you hurt? Richard was here, she explained, the words tumbling out as she described the visit and what she had overheard. I was about to ride to town to find you or the sheriff. Luke dismounted quickly, scanning the property with narrowed eyes before focusing back on Eliza. You did right to prepare to leave. Let's get to town now and report this to Sheriff Taylor. As they rode toward Lordsburg, Eliza related everything she could remember of Richard's conversation with his companions. Luke listened grimly, his jaw tightening when she mentioned the threat of consequences. He's not going to give up, she concluded miserably. As long as I'm alive, he'll consider me his property to reclaim. You're not property, Luke stated firmly. You're my wife, legally and in the eyes of God and man. If Norton can't accept that, he'll have to answer to me. The fierce protectiveness in his voice stirred something in Eliza's heart, a warmth that momentarily overshadowed her fear. It was the first time Luke had referred to their marriage without qualifiers or reminders of their arrangement, the first time he had simply claimed her as his wife. Sheriff Taylor took their report seriously, promising to issue a trespass warning and increase patrols near their property. But I can't post a deputy at your ranch, he explained apologetically. Just don't have the manpower. I understand, Luke replied. We'll take precautions ourselves. Those precautions became immediately apparent as Luke purchased additional ammunition for his rifle and revolver before they returned home. At the ranch, he methodically checked all doors and windows, adding extra bars where needed and explaining to Eliza how to secure the house in his absence. I'd cancel the cattle drive if I could, he told her that evening as they ate a simple supper. But we need the sale money to keep the ranch going. I know, Eliza assured him, though the thought of being alone with Richard potentially lurking nearby terrified her. I'll be careful while you're gone. Luke studied her face, indecision clear in his expression. Finally, he reached a decision. No, I won't leave you here alone, not with Norton making threats. You'll come with me on the drive. Eliza stared at him in surprise. But I wouldn't know how to help. You'll learn, Luke said confidently. You've picked up everything else about ranch life quickly enough. Besides, we'll have 4 experienced hands with us. You can help with camp cooking and still be safer than here alone. The cattle drive, scheduled to depart in 3 days, suddenly transformed from a worrying separation to a new adventure. Luke spent the intervening time teaching Eliza the basics of riding for long periods and explaining what the journey would entail. It's only to the railhead at Deeming, he explained. About 70 miles, so 6 or 7 days each way if the weather holds and nothing goes wrong. Eliza absorbed his instructions with determination, pushing aside her fear of the unfamiliar to focus on the safety traveling together would provide. She packed supplies for cooking, mended clothes they would need, and prepared the house for their extended absence. The morning of departure dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for moving cattle. Luke introduced Eliza to the 4 cowboys he had hired for the drive, experienced men named Martinez, Dawson, Carpenter, and Stevens. If they were surprised to see the boss's wife joining them, they hid it well, tipping their hats respectfully before returning to their preparations. As they pushed the small herd of 30 cattle onto the trail south, Eliza felt a strange mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. The open range stretched before them, dotted with spring wildflowers and the vivid green of new growth. Riding beside the chuck wagon driven by Carpenter, who would share cooking duties with her, She found herself smiling despite the circumstances that had necessitated her presence. The first day passed without incident, though Eliza discovered muscles she hadn't known existed as they protested the hours in the saddle. By evening, when they made camp near a small creek, she was exhausted but satisfied with having completed the day's journey without complaint or mishap. Carpenter proved to be an amiable companion at the cook-fire, sharing stories of 30 years on cattle drives while teaching her the tricks of preparing meals in the open. The other men kept a respectful distance, addressing her as Mrs. Quinn, and thanking her politely for the food but otherwise treating her presence as unremarkable. Luke checked on her frequently throughout the day, his concern evident but never smothering. As they sat by the fire after supper, the cowboys having withdrawn to their bedrolls some distance away, he asked quietly, "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," Eliza admitted. "It's beautiful out here." She gazed at the vast canopy of stars above them, so much clearer away from even the modest lights of their ranch. "I never imagined I'd be doing something like this." Luke smiled, the firelight catching the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "You're full of surprises, Eliza Quinn." Most women would be complaining about the dust and discomfort. The use of her married name, spoken with such warmth, caused a flutter in her chest. "Perhaps I'm not most women," she replied, surprising herself with the hint of flirtation in her voice. Luke's gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than usual. "No," he agreed softly, "you're certainly not." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Martinez called from his position as first watch, breaking the spell. "Boss, thought I saw something moving out by the remuda." Luke was instantly alert, rising to his feet. "Stay here," he told Eliza before moving to join the cowboy. Sleep came fitfully that night, with Eliza acutely aware of Luke's bedroll positioned protectively near hers. The vastness of the open range, which had seemed so liberating during the day, felt exposing in the darkness, leaving her imagining threats in every shadow. The second day brought sore muscles but clearer skies. As they continued south, the terrain gradually changed, becoming more arid with patches of sand interspersed among the grasses. The cattle moved steadily, apparently unbothered by the growing heat. By late afternoon, Luke rode back from his position at the head of the herd to check on Eliza. "Storm brewing to the west," he informed her, pointing to dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Might hit us by evening. You holding up all right?" she nodded, adjusting her hat against the sun. "Just a bit sore. Nothing serious." Luke smiled, the expression softening the weather-worn lines of his face. "You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Quinn." His voice dropped slightly. "I'm glad you're here." The simple statement contained layers of meaning that Eliza wasn't ready to fully examine. Instead, she returned his smile. "So am I." The storm arrived just as they were setting up camp, bringing wind and driving rain that turned the ground to mud within minutes. Carpenter and Eliza struggled to establish a cook fire under a hastily erected canvas shelter, while the cowboys worked to keep the cattle from scattering in the sudden downpour. Luke returned to camp drenched and exhausted, but satisfied that the herd was secure. "They'll be fine," he assured Eliza as he accepted a cup of hot coffee from her. "Cattle are tougher than they look." Despite the storm, they managed to prepare a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits. The cowboys ate quickly before returning to their watch duties, leaving Luke and Eliza alone beneath the canvas. "You should try to get some sleep," Luke suggested, noticing her stifling a yawn. "We'll need to start early tomorrow to make up time lost to this weather." Eliza nodded, rising to check their bedrolls, which had been placed under a separate tarp. The ground beneath was wet but not sodden, and the oilskin beneath the blankets would keep the worst of the moisture at bay. As she arranged her bedding, a sudden gust of wind tore at the tarp, threatening to pull it free. Luke was beside her instantly, securing the flapping corner with additional stakes. In the process, they found themselves pressed close together in the small, sheltered space, his arm around her waist to steady her against the wind. For a breathless moment, they remained motionless, the storm raging around them while a different kind of tempest built between them. Luke's face was inches from hers, droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes as his gaze dropped to her lips. "Eliza," he murmured, her name a question and request all at once. She answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a tentative kiss that quickly deepened as Luke pulled her closer. Unlike the perfunctory kiss that had sealed their wedding vows, this was a genuine expression of the feelings that had been developing over months of shared life. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he admitted quietly. "Why didn't you?" Eliza asked, her hand still resting on his chest, feeling the strong heartbeat beneath his wet shirt. "Our arrangement," he reminded her. "I promised not to expect anything from you." Eliza smiled, a new confidence flowing through her. "What if I want to change the terms of our arrangement?" Luke pulled back slightly to study her face, his expression serious despite the joy in his eyes. "Eliza, I need you to be certain. After everything you've been through, I would never want you to feel obligated or rushed." "I'm not," she assured him, touched by his concern. "I've had months to observe the man you truly are, Luke. You've shown me what respect and kindness look like in a marriage, even one that began as convenience." She took a deep breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you, not out of gratitude or necessity, but because of who you are." The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter warm, natural, right. Luke's smile bloomed slowly, transforming his entire face. "I fell in love with you somewhere between teaching you to drive the wagon and watching you stand up to a blizzard to find me," he confessed. "But I was prepared to honor our original agreement for as long as you needed." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her composure. "And now?" she whispered. "Now," he replied, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face, "I'd like to court my wife properly if she'll allow it." Eliza laughed softly at the old-fashioned phrasing. "I believe that can be arranged, Mr. Quinn." Their second kiss, deeper and more confident than the first, sealed this new understanding between them. As the storm continued outside their small shelter, Eliza realized that for the first time since her ill-fated marriage to Richard, she was looking toward the future with hope rather than dread. The remainder of the cattle drive took on a new quality following their confession. Though nothing changed in their public behavior, Luke remained respectfully professional in front of the cowboys, and Eliza continued her duties with the same diligence. Private moments held a new significance. Fingers brushed while passing coffee cups, glances lingered across evening fires, and conversations deepened beyond practicalities to dreams and hopes. They reached Deeming on the 6th day, where Luke successfully negotiated the sale of his cattle to a buyer from the railroad company. The transaction complete, they bid farewell to the cowboys, who would make their own way home or to their next employment, and prepared for the return journey with just the chuck wagon and their riding horses. "We'll take our time going back," Luke told Eliza as they left town. "No rush now that the business is done." The return journey, free from the pressures of moving cattle and with only each other for company, became almost like a honeymoon they had never taken. They traveled shorter distances each day, stopping early to make camp in particularly beautiful spots. Luke showed Eliza hidden springs and remarkable vistas he had discovered during previous trips, clearly delighting in her wonder at the wild beauty of the territory. In the evenings, they talked more openly about their developing feelings and what they hoped for their future together. Luke spoke of expanding the ranch, perhaps adding sheep as well as cattle to diversify their income. Eliza shared her desire to perhaps someday open a small bakery in Lordsburg, using skills that had brought her rare joy even during her darkest days with Richard. "Would you want children?" Luke asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The question, posed gently but directly, made Eliza consider possibilities she had deliberately avoided thinking about. With Richard, the idea of bringing children into their violent household had terrified her, but with Luke, "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "With you, I would." Luke's smile held both joy and promise. "I'd like that too, a family of our own." The conversation marked another milestone in their evolving relationship, opening doors to a future neither had dared imagine when they first entered their arrangement of convenience. They were a day's ride from the ranch when disaster struck. The trail followed a narrow passage between rocky hills, with scrub brush and boulders providing the only vegetation in the harsh landscape. Luke rode slightly ahead, leading the way through the familiar territory, when a shot rang out, echoing sharply against the rock walls. Luke's horse reared in panic as a bullet struck the ground just in front of them. He controlled the animal with expert skill while drawing his revolver in a single fluid motion. "Eliza, get down," he shouted, scanning the hillside for the source of the shot. Eliza reacted instantly, sliding from her saddle to take cover behind a large boulder. Heart pounding, she peered around the rock in time to see 3 riders emerge from behind an outcropping ahead: Richard and the same 2 men who had accompanied him to the ranch. "Quinn," Richard called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I've come for what's mine." Luke had dismounted as well, positioning himself behind the chuck wagon for protection while maintaining a clear line of sight to the men. "Norton, you're trespassing and threatening us with firearms." "That's enough to hang a man in this territory." Richard laughed, the sound chilling in its confidence. "No witnesses out here except your word against ours, and we're 3 to your 1. His gaze shifted, searching the area. "Where is she? Where's my wife?" "She's not your wife anymore," Luke replied steadily. "The court confirmed that. Go home, Norton, before this gets worse for you." One of Richard's companions shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, maybe we should just shut up," Richard snapped. "She's coming with me today, one way or another." To Luke he called, "I'll give you one chance, Quinn. Send her out and you can ride away. Otherwise, we finish this here." Eliza's blood ran cold at the ultimatum. Luke had only his revolver against 3 armed men. Even if he was a better shot, the odds were overwhelmingly against him. "Stay where you are," Luke called to her, as if reading her thoughts. "I'm not letting him near you." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats before Richard lost patience. He fired another shot, this one striking the wagon inches from Luke's position. Luke returned fire immediately, his shot more accurate, causing Richard to duck for cover. The exchange triggered a full gunfight, with bullets splintering wood and ricocheting off rocks as both sides sought advantage. Luke, outnumbered but more skilled, managed to wound one of Richard's companions in the shoulder, reducing their effective force. Eliza, crouched behind her boulder, felt utterly helpless until she remembered the rifle secured to her saddle. The horse had bolted several yards away when the shooting began, but had stopped to graze nervously behind a stand of scrub brush. Taking advantage of a momentary lull in the gunfire, she dashed toward the animal, keeping low. The horse shied initially, but allowed her to approach and retrieve the Winchester rifle Luke had insisted she carry throughout their journey. She had practiced with it only a few times and wasn't confident in her marksmanship, but having the weapon made her feel less vulnerable. As she returned to cover, the shooting intensified. Peering cautiously around the boulder, she saw that Luke had been forced to retreat as Richard, and his remaining able-bodied companion attempted to flank his position. The injured man had taken refuge behind their horses, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Eliza's hands trembled as she checked the rifle's loading mechanism the way Luke had taught her. She had never fired at a person before and wasn't certain she could do so now, even to save their lives. But when a bullet struck dangerously close to Luke's new position, forcing him to flatten himself against the ground with limited cover, her resolve hardened. Taking careful aim at a point above and to the right of Richard's companion, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was deafening, and the recoil bruised her shoulder, but the shot had the desired effect. The bullet struck rock, sending fragments spraying near the man, who ducked with a startled curse. His momentary distraction gave Luke the opportunity to fire again, this time hitting the man in the leg. He fell, crying out in pain and effectively removing himself from the fight. Richard, now alone against two armed opponents, sought better cover behind a large boulder. "Eliza!" he shouted, his voice edged with desperation. "Is this what you want, to murder your husband? You're not my husband anymore," she called back, surprised by the strength in her voice. "I made you everything you are," Richard yelled, his facade of control crumbling into naked rage. "You were nothing when I found you. Nothing." The familiar accusations designed to diminish and control her no longer held power. Eliza stood from behind her cover, rifle ready but not aimed directly at him. "I was never nothing, Richard. I just believed I was because you told me so." Her appearance drew Richard's attention, giving Luke an opportunity to circle toward a better position. Richard noticed the movement too late, finding himself suddenly exposed to Luke's clear line of fire. "Drop your weapon, Norton," Luke commanded. "It's over." For a moment, it seemed Richard might comply. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his gun hand lowered a fraction. Then his expression hardened, and in one desperate motion, he swung his revolver toward Eliza. Luke fired first. His bullet struck Richard in the chest, the impact throwing him backward onto the dusty ground. His unfired revolver fell from suddenly lifeless fingers as a dark stain spread across his shirt. The sudden silence that followed seemed to press against Eliza's ears. She stood frozen, the rifle still clutched in her hands, as Luke approached Richard's fallen form cautiously. After checking for signs of life and finding none, he turned to Eliza, his expression grim but resolute. "He's gone," he said simply. "Are you hurt?" Eliza shook her head, unable to form words as the reality of what had happened washed over her. Richard was dead. The man who had controlled and tormented her for years could never hurt her again. The knowledge should have brought relief, but instead she felt numb, her emotions locked behind a wall of shock. Luke secured the weapons of Richard's companions, who offered no further resistance. The wounded men would live, though both required medical attention. After binding their injuries as best he could, Luke loaded them into the chuck wagon for transport to Lordsburg. "What about him?" the man with the shoulder wound asked, nodding toward Richard's body. "We'll bring him too," Luke replied. "The sheriff will want to investigate." They wrapped Richard's body in a tarp and secured it to the back of his horse, a grim burden that would accompany them to town. Throughout these necessary tasks, Eliza moved as if in a dream, following Luke's gentle instructions mechanically while her mind struggled to process the day's events. The journey to Lordsburg passed in a blur. Sheriff Taylor met them at the edge of town, alerted by the unusual procession of wounded men and a body. Luke explained what had happened while Eliza sat silent in the wagon, still clutching the unfired rifle as if it were a lifeline. "Sounds like clear self-defense to me," the sheriff concluded after hearing the full account and the reluctant corroboration of Richard's surviving companions. Norton came looking for trouble and found more than he bargained for. He glanced at Eliza with sympathy. "I'll need statements from both of you, but that can wait until tomorrow. Get your wife home, Quinn. She looks about done in." Luke nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Sheriff. We'll come by in the morning." Instead of continuing to the ranch, Luke brought Eliza to the boarding house, correctly judging that she needed the comfort of familiar surroundings and female company. Mrs. Davis took one look at Eliza's pale face and immediately took charge, ushering her upstairs to the room she had occupied months earlier while Luke explained the situation in hushed tones. "She's in shock," Mrs. Davis diagnosed when she returned downstairs. "I've put her to bed with a hot water bottle and a mild sleeping draft. She needs rest more than anything now." Luke ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion and worry evident in every line of his body. "Will she be all right? She hasn't spoken since it happened." The older woman's expression softened. "She's stronger than she looks, that one. Give her time to process what's happened. Richard Norton controlled her life for years. His death isn't something she'll come to terms with overnight." "I killed a man in front of my wife," Luke said quietly, the full weight of the day's events settling on his shoulders. "I never wanted her to see that side of me." "You protected her from a man who was trying to kill you both," Mrs. Davis corrected firmly. "There's no shame in that, Luke Quinn, and don't you dare start thinking otherwise." The practical wisdom in her words penetrated his growing self-doubt. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I just wish she hadn't been there." "Well, she was," Mrs. Davis replied pragmatically. "And now you need to be there for her as she works through it." She shooed him toward the stairs. "Get some rest yourself. The room next to hers is empty. I'll bring you both breakfast in the morning." Luke spent a restless night, repeatedly checking on Eliza only to find her sleeping fitfully, occasionally murmuring unintelligible words as dreams claimed her. By dawn, he was sitting in a chair beside her bed, watching the first light of morning illuminate her pale face. When Eliza finally opened her eyes, confusion clouded her expression momentarily before recognition and memory returned. "Luke," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm here," he assured her, taking her outstretched hand. "You're safe at Mrs. Davis's boarding house." Eliza struggled to sit up, wincing at muscles stiffened by tension and the previous day's exertions. "Richard is gone," Luke confirmed gently. "He can never hurt you again." Tears welled in her eyes, though whether from relief, delayed shock, or some more complex emotion, Luke couldn't tell. He simply held her hand as the tears flowed, offering silent support until the storm passed. "I should feel something more," she finally said, wiping her eyes. "Grief or relief or something, but I just feel empty." Luke squeezed her hand reassuringly. "There's no right way to feel, Eliza. Whatever you're experiencing is valid." She nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "What happens now? We give our statements to Sheriff Taylor this morning. After that, we can go home whenever you're ready." He hesitated, then added, "Unless you'd prefer to stay in town longer." The question carried unspoken concern about her willingness to return to the isolated ranch after such a traumatic experience. Eliza considered it carefully before shaking her head. "No, I want to go home. Our home." She looked directly at Luke, something of her usual strength returning to her gaze. "He's taken enough from me. I won't let him take that too." Relief washed over Luke's features. "Then home we'll go as soon as you feel strong enough." Their meeting with Sheriff Taylor was mercifully brief. The lawman had already taken statements from Richard's companions, who had admitted their role in the ambush, and confirmed that Richard had intended to either reclaim Eliza by force or ensure no one else could have her. With all accounts aligning and clear evidence of self-defense, the sheriff saw no reason to detain Luke or pursue further investigation. "Territory's better off without men like Norton," he commented as they prepared to leave his office. "Just sorry you both had to go through this." Mrs. Davis insisted they stay for a proper meal before departing, feeding them heartily while providing practical advice about dealing with the aftermath of violence. By early afternoon, they were on the trail home, the chuck wagon considerably lighter without its grim cargo. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent, golden light bathing the modest buildings in a warm glow that somehow made them seem more welcoming than ever. Eliza felt a surprising surge of emotion at the sight, not the fear or hesitation she had half expected, but genuine relief. This place had become her sanctuary, her true home. As Luke helped her down from the wagon, she impulsively wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his chest. Startled but pleased, he returned the embrace, holding her close as tension visibly drained from her body. "Welcome home, Eliza," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you," she replied, looking up at him with clear eyes. "For everything. For saving me not just yesterday but every day since we met." Luke shook his head slightly. "You saved yourself when you left Norton. I just offered a hand along the way." His humility, so characteristic of the man she had come to love, brought a smile to Eliza's face, the first genuine smile since the shooting. "Then thank you for offering your hand," she amended, "and your home, and your name." "All freely given," Luke assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "And with no regrets." That evening, after unpacking and restoring order to the house that had stood empty during their journey, they sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The familiar routine felt both ordinary and profoundly significant after the events that had nearly cost them everything. "Luke," Eliza said after a comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." He turned to her, expression attentive but neutral. "Oh, yes." She gathered her courage before continuing. "I think we should consider it completed." Luke's face fell slightly before he schooled his features. "I see. If that's what you want, no," Eliza interrupted, realizing her poor choice of words. "That's not what I mean." She took his hand in hers. "I mean that I don't want a marriage of convenience anymore. I want a real marriage, with you." Understanding dawned in Luke's eyes, quickly followed by joy. "Are you certain? After everything that's happened, I'd understand if you needed more time." Eliza shook her head. "Richard took 5 years of my life. I won't give him any more by delaying happiness out of fear." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Luke Quinn, not because you rescued me or offered me safety, but because you've shown me what real respect and partnership look like." Luke lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverence. "I love you too, Eliza, more than I thought possible." Their kiss, tender at first but deepening with shared emotion, sealed this new chapter in their relationship. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool evening air. "So," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "does this mean you'll be moving your things to our bedroom?" Eliza laughed, the sound freer and lighter than it had been since their first meeting. "Yes, Mr. Quinn, I believe it does." The The transition from their arrangement of convenience to a true marriage unfolded naturally in the weeks that followed. Eliza moved her belongings into Luke's bedroom, now their shared room, and they discovered the joy of waking beside each other each morning. Physical intimacy developed gradually, with Luke's patient respect allowing Eliza to overcome the negative associations Richard had created around such experiences. Spring advanced toward summer, bringing longer days filled with ranch work and shared plans for the future. They decided to expand the garden, add a second story to the house for additional bedrooms, and increase the cattle herd with the profits from the recent sale. Each decision made together reinforced the partnership they were building, so different from Eliza's previous experience of being dictated to rather than consulted. In July, exactly 1 year after their hasty wedding in Silver City, Luke surprised Eliza with a small box at breakfast. Inside lay a delicate gold ring set with a small sapphire, far more elegant than the plain band they had purchased out of necessity. "I thought you might like something you chose yourself," he explained as she admired the ring. "But in the meantime, this reminded me of your eyes." Touched beyond words, Eliza slipped the ring onto her finger alongside her wedding band. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "though I've never needed fancy things to be happy with you." Luke smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Quinn. Here's to many more." "Many more," Eliza agreed, her heart full with the promise of their shared future. That afternoon they rode into Lordsburg to visit Mrs. Davis, who had become a dear friend and regular visitor to the ranch. The older woman greeted them warmly, insisting they stay for dinner to celebrate their anniversary properly. As they sat in her parlor, enjoying cake and coffee before departing, Mrs. Davis studied Eliza with knowing eyes. "You're positively glowing, my dear. Married life must agree with you." Eliza exchanged a glance with Luke, a private smile passing between them. They had shared their suspicions with each other just days earlier, but had wanted confirmation before announcing it publicly. "Actually," Eliza replied, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach, "we have some news." Mrs. Davis's eyes widened before she broke into a delighted smile. "Well, it's about time. When are you due?" "December, we think," Luke answered, unable to contain his proud grin. "Just in time for Christmas." The older woman rose to embrace them both, her joy genuine and unreserved. "Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it? A year ago you arrived in my boarding house bruised and terrified. Now look at you happy, healthy, and expecting a child." Eliza nodded, gratitude filling her as she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From desperate escape to newfound happiness, from a marriage of convenience to deepest love, her path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet every step, even the painful ones, had led her to where she belonged. That evening, as they rode home together through the gathering dusk, Eliza felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Richard's shadow, which had loomed so large for so long, had finally receded, leaving room for light and hope to flourish. Luke reached across the space between their horses to take her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noting her contemplative expression. Eliza smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "About how far I've come, about how words can shape our reality." She looked up at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. "They said I deserved the abuse," she recounted softly. "For so long I believed them." Luke's expression darkened briefly at the memory of her past suffering before softening with love. "And now I know better," Eliza replied with quiet certainty. "Now I know I deserve only kindness, and thanks to you, that's exactly what I've found." As their home appeared on the horizon, warm light spilling from windows Luke had left lit to welcome their return. Eliza felt the future stretching before them, bright with promise, rich with possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, partners in the truest sense of the word. The child growing within her would never know the fear and shame that had marked Eliza's first marriage. Instead, this baby would be born into love and respect, witnessing daily the gentle strength of a father who believed violence had no place in family, and the quiet courage of a mother who had reclaimed her worth from those who sought to diminish it. Life, Eliza had learned, could begin again at unexpected moments. For her, it had started anew the day a kind cowboy offered water to a stranger and saw the worth behind her bruises. And in that new life, she had discovered not just safety, but joy, not just absence of pain, but presence of love. As they dismounted at their home, Luke drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise renewed with each passing day. Above them, stars scattered across the vast New Mexico sky like diamonds on velvet, witnesses to the miracle of healing and hope that had blossomed in the harsh beauty of the Wild West. "I love you, Eliza Quinn," Luke whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, standing tall in the certainty of her worth, and the knowledge that she had finally found where she belonged, not as possession or property, but as beloved partner in a life built on respect, kindness, and enduring love.